Hey there, Yuris here, and welcome to the Community ROI podcast. Here, senior community experts, founders, and C-level managers tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about how community impacts business growth. By listening to these conversations, you'll get actionable steps on how to connect community goals with business goals to skyrocket business growth while still bringing extreme value to community members. And my guest is one and only amazing Carrie Melissa Jones, a social science researcher and strategist who advocates for community building across organizations of all sizes and helps leaders strengthen their community foundations. And by all sizes, I mean companies such as Airbnb, Discord, Google, and Microsoft. Also, Carrie is the founder of the CMJ community of community professionals and co-author of the amazing book, Building Brand Communities. And Carrie has a ton of passion for fostering connection, belonging, and psychological safety to create resilient workplaces. So, welcome, Carrie.
Thank you for having me. And the one and only Yurii is hosting.
always happy to talk to you. I won't spill our little secret on how to get Carrie on a call, but here we are. So let's start with the first question. So, what's your definition of a community goal?
Yeah, so starting at the highest of levels, it's essentially just a measure that you set for yourself that you're trying to achieve. It's something that you're trying to achieve as most likely as the community builder or the community steward. And goals can come in all different, like at all different levels of an organization. So I guess we can talk more about that and what types of goals are going to be relevant to the community builder versus the executive or the investor or somebody else. But yeah, it's essentially just something we're trying to achieve together.
What is the main difference between goals of community builder and goals of, let's say, CEO?
So in a for-profit corporate context, that I have to answer it that way because I work with all types of organizations, including like spiritual and religious organizations and things like that. And what they care about is very different in a way, also not that different, surprisingly. So for the community builder, you're going to care mainly about things like the health of your community, how well connected your members are to one another, how satisfied they are in the community, how active the community is, how vibrant it feels. So these are kind of measures of community health. The executive, again, in that for-profit context, at the end of the day, what they care about more than anything else is, are we growing or are we at least stable? And for a for-profit public company, are we growing? You must grow in order to
Yeah.
sustain. And or are we saving money? Are we simplifying our operations? That's it.
So let's focus, as you've said, on for-profit organizations. And what is one goal of the community that you are working with at the moment or worked before that inspires you the most?
Mm-hmm. So this is a really hard question for me to answer because I will tell you, we talk a lot about community ROI, especially from a more senior perspective. It's like, it's not that complicated. It's really not. But actually, I will tell you that every community I've ever worked with has a different set of metrics to define success. That doesn't mean they have to be complicated or it's impossible to define them. But in the sense that like there's no simple answer to metrics, that is true. But one that I'm working with right now that is really, really inspiring is an organization that knows for them that sense of belonging is actually part of their what they're calling their secret sauce
Hmm.
of the value that they bring to their members. And so if there's no sense of belonging, there's no members. If there's no members, there's no revenue, um, there's no growth. So for them, sense of belonging they actually do care about it as not as the only measure of success, but as part of a larger scorecard of measures. And it's a really important piece of that scorecard. So we've been working with them. How do you measure sense of belonging is a big question that social science researchers have been trying to answer for decades. If you look at the literature on this, there's no one agreed upon measure. There's a couple. It's like the SOBP, which is like the sense of belonging. I forget what the P stands for at this moment. It comes from the nursing field. There's also like sense of belonging in terms of like psychological belonging inside of groups. There's like sense of belonging in terms of how you belong in the world. And so that it's complicated. It's very complicated, but what this client has been working on is deciding, what does sense of belonging mean to our members? When they say I belong here, what does that mean to them? So we've actually stepped back with them. We did a bunch of qualitative interviews with their members to try to hear from them directly. What words are coming up when they describe what it means to belong? When they
Mm.
describe the special sauce of this organization, what words are they using? So from that, I did a big literature review of like all the different instruments that have been used over many years in different studies. And then I combined that with research that my colleague Kelly and I did. Um, and we've created this custom sense of belonging measurement tool. We're about to
Mm.
actually go out and test it in 2 weeks, where the survey is now like set up in the survey software. We're ready to go out with it. But yeah, it's really cool. There's 5 components of belonging, or 5 dimensions of belonging, that we found for this particular community. We're asking at least 3 questions to assess each one of those dimensions, and we'll find out how those dimensions kind of add up into, or don't add up into, an overall sense of belonging. So that's been really, really cool. It's like my researcher dream to work on that kind of a problem.
It's interesting that you mentioned that it's important for this organization to have this sense of belonging and that impacts business overall. So I'm curious, how exactly the sense of belonging is connected with business goals?
Yeah. So for them, this is not a for-profit. Well, I shouldn't say that. It is a for-profit organization, but it is mainly funded by donations
Mm.
and dues, membership dues. So it's sort of like an association, right? So for them, people say that they renew and they say that they continue to donate because they feel this sense of belonging. That's self-reported, but they have heard that so many times over the last however many 10, 20 years, that for them, they know that it is connected to essentially to revenue. So if people feel a sense of belonging, they will stay members. So it's directly tied to that. So that's why it's part of their scorecard overall.
Yeah, it's like if you are like how your team is playing, you are going to their matches. If you don't like, yeah, I
Yeah.
won't go there. So,
Fair weather fan.
so what metrics do you use? Like, what do you track? How do you measure this sense of belonging? Maybe in this example or overall.
So this example is really unique. And like I said, how do I measure it? It's different for every single client. It's different for every single client. So just to speak more broadly, um, I'm looking at the highest level, why is this organization investing in community? And then this is the kind of thing that is simple. Like asking that question is simple. And being able to have the conversation about why an organization has invested in community is simple in a sense. The answers you get to that question will be complex, multifaceted. People will have different opinions. And I was actually just talking with a CMO of an organization, and she was like, it's not complicated, Carrie. Like, she was like, it's really not. And she kept using this term unit economics. And she's like, it's just unit economics. And I was like, okay, like, but you don't, like, it actually is a lot more complex than that, because communities aren't just about, at the end of the day, like making money or saving money. They're not. At least not in an environment that is like not manipulating and extracting from people. So when we're looking at what the outcomes could be in building brand communities, we talk about this. There's 7 different types of outcomes, or 7 different types of organizational goals that you might aspire to. So those include things like product innovation, product feedback. That's a really popular one, especially among enterprise communities. I'm sure like Brian Oblinger probably talked about that one on your previous podcast. Support is another one. So customer success, customer support, getting answers to questions that people have like in the moment. It's this more transactional reason for investing in community, but it's a really important one. And then there's like these bigger outcomes around like learning and learning outcomes and things like that. So I work a lot with internal communities of practice. So are people getting better at their jobs? Do they feel more effective? Are they more confident? Did they learn the skill that they needed to learn quickly? So community can fuel those kinds of outcomes as well. Sometimes it is about like affiliate growth and ambassador growth and growing referrals and growing the marketing pipeline. And sometimes it's actually about sales pipeline as well. So it's, and there's a whole conversation about multi-touch attribution that we could get into. So yeah, it varies a lot. I'm sorry if that wasn't a simple answer to your question.
As I always say, I feel like community is always in the center of every organization. It's somehow connected to almost every team. And I feel like
Yeah.
it kind of impacts not only like outsider members, but also team members. Because
Yes.
I always approach, when build community within a company, I always approach team members as inner community members. And I also have to kind of build community inside to build better community outside. And coming back to the sense of belonging goal. So for example, if someone has a similar goal, so they need people to be engaged, they need people to be involved, to have this feeling of belonging. And yes, it impacts business, because otherwise, if they do not feel that, they won't be a customer, or they won't donate, etc. So what specific actions do you take to reach that goal?
In that case, where sense of belonging is important.
In that case, if you can talk about this case, yes. If not, like overall, like how to make people feel this feeling.
Yeah. Well, we can't make people feel anything.
Yeah,
let's be very clear.
Okay,
let's be very clear.
Let's tell
how can we encourage feelings of
how to manipulate
connectedness. Well, for this particular, what we learned about these 5 dimensions of belonging for this organization, and I'm not going to name them all, because I don't want someone to think like, oh, those are the 5 dimensions in every case, and now I'm going to go take that and use it for me, because it's not going to be the same. That's why we did the qualitative interviews first. But I'll give some examples of the dimensions, which one of them is like connection to staff. So how connected are they to the actual team? Like a member, how connected does that team member feel to staff members? What we learned about that dimension is that it's not actually like, oh, I have a relationship with Yurii, or like I have conversations with Yurii. No, it's actually like, I feel that if I wanted to reach out to Yurii, he would respond to me, even if I've never reached out to him before. It's just a feeling people have. So how do you quantify that? You try really hard to do it, but there's no perfect way to quantify that. It's not possible. That is what's impossible to measure. And so that's one of the aspects. So given that that's one of the aspects, then we can think about, okay, what are some, in social science terms, like what are some interventions we can design? In business terms, it's what pilots can we run? What should we be launching next year? So in this case, it's if staff connection is important, maybe you need to run more town halls. Maybe you need to do a series of town halls in the next year. Maybe you need to do more direct outreach to specific members and actually start building relationships with them. Maybe you just need to say, when you give talks, I'm always here. Please come to me. Here's my email and I will respond to you. Or maybe you need to start a TikTok and respond to people on TikTok. There's many interventions or pilots you could run from that could then help increase that sense that there's connection to staff. So that's one dimension. But what we're learning from this is again, there's 5 of them. And then there's just so many experiments we can be running within those 5. That's where the really creative, fun stuff happens. Because now we know, okay, when we're brainstorming for new programming and new pilots we want to launch in the next year, let's make sure that we're doing it within these constraints. So that's been really cool.
So am I hearing it correctly that in order to make things, let's say, right, you always have to ask community members first, how do they expect? Not how do they expect, but how do they feel? How do they understand the sense of belonging, meaning, and then to come up with, I don't know, let's say a few ideas, and then to test them, and then to see the outcomes. What is the process? How it works usually?
Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing as right, because there's many ways we can understand this. A scientist could come in and say, I'm actually going to measure sense of belonging by the amount of your people's heart rates and their skin conductivity and things like that. And you could hook machines up to them and measure their biological responses to things and that it's a very creepy way of measuring it. But that could be an interesting area of inquiry for some neuroscientists.
You never know.
So like there's, and maybe that is a more accurate measure of belonging. I don't know, um, but for our process, what I can say is the process that feels the most ethical and well-rounded to me involves, yes, talking to members first and hearing from them what does belonging mean to them before we make assumptions about what belonging means. Um, so, I mean, there's many ways you could go about that. I think the most efficient way is to just go ahead and talk to people. I think it might feel inefficient while you're doing it because conversations take a while. They also take a long time to parse through all the data, although AI is helping with that a lot, speeding that process up, which has been really cool. But there's other ways to do it. You could run a survey and then you could have open-ended responses and ask people in a survey, what they want to share about their feelings of belonging. You could do some combination of those things. So there's many ways you could go about it, but I think having the input of what do members think about this, I think is critical.
So aside of this, from this example, what are the teams that you work the most with when you build a community, and how exactly usually community impacts them?
Yeah. This is a great question that is also just as diverse as the teams that I work with. I'm so sorry, Yurii.
Let's talk about everything. Like we still
Yeah.
have time.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think our team at the CMJ Group, we are uniquely positioned to work across, like we work with the government, we work with the government, non-government organizations, but a lot of consultants will work. I mean, Brian, again, I'll call him out again. Brian, perfect example. Or like someone like Erica Cool. They work really distinctly with like enterprise SaaS companies. I have moved away from that almost entirely because I don't necessarily like to work with some of the metrics that those organizations work with, but I think it's really important, the work that they do. But their answer to this question is going to be very different than mine. So for me, I have worked on research teams. I've worked on learning management teams, HR teams. I have worked, right now we're working with like the executive director of the entire organization to do this research. And I think the best place for community to be positioned is at that higher level, because as you mentioned earlier, it's not actually like the community builder shouldn't be the one that's owning all things community. Actually, your job is to spread community thinking throughout the organization so that the entire organization becomes more resilient. And that can really only happen at that higher leadership level. So in an ideal situation, I would say I'm working directly with like a CEO or an executive leader, but that's not always the case. So yeah,
Yeah,
I've never worked
exactly.
with a sales team and been successful at it. I will tell you that.
Yeah, I would say that having a CEO invested in the community who supports what you do and fully understands, or at least try to understand, is like totally next level.
Mhm.
Still, I feel like in many cases you have to kind of win other teams, start with
Yes.
other teams and then go forward. So I'm curious, what is one metric that you use to show community's impact to different teams? Like, for example, one metric for a product team, one metric for a research team, one metric for a
Mhm.
marketing team. Like in your practice, what is one metric to show those impact?
Mm. Well, I think it's really important that the metric is not the same across those teams.
Yeah, totally,
So
definitely. There are
yeah,
different metrics. Yeah.
you should customize it. So if you're working with marketing, for example, one of the big ones right now, because there's more tools like Common Room and things like that that are coming out, is like measuring sentiment. And sentiment is something that marketing teams generally care about a lot, of like, how are our customers actually feeling about us? So that's one of the areas. NPS in the past has been a big one, Net Promoter Score, but I feel like it's kind of waning in popularity
Mhm.
for a lot of different reasons. But it's still there. And yeah, if you're talking about support teams, customer satisfaction, customer effort scores. If you're talking about product teams, it's about ideas and ideas implemented and speed of implementation, speed of innovation. If you're talking about marketing and sales, it's usually like influence on pipeline, or like how much percentage influence on pipeline, or how direct that influence is. So again, like there's not one metric, which is really frustrating. And that's again, like I just want to repeat, that is what is complicated, is that there's not one metric. But having the conversation, that's the work of a leader. And that's the work that community builders need to be doing, and having these conversations across teams and with executives.
Let's imagine that you are a community manager in any kind of company, for profit, non-profit. Like your task is to build a community and to help your business to grow.
Mhm.
Vague goal. So you have
Yeah.
no idea how to do it, but you are
Right.
tasked as a community manager. They like, you have to build a community and help to grow our business. So what is the
Yeah.
first step to take in this situation?
Oh my goodness. I mean, are we talking about somebody who's just coming in on day one? Like what would you do on day one?
Yeah, they just hired a community
Yeah.
manager, like, hey,
Yeah.
you have to help to grow our business, like show us community magic.
Yes. Well, culturally, different organizations are going to push you to work at different rates. Um, and what I mean by that is, like, if you moved into a really fast moving startup, like if you were to go into OpenAI right now and be like, my answer to this would be very different. You just need to start doing stuff. Like if you're at OpenAI, just start doing stuff.
Just
Okay.
spray and pray.
Exactly. Because they don't have time, and people aren't, I personally think that's a little bit toxic. Like that's not my ideal answer. And I think they all probably need to slow down a little bit. Um, but my answer to that is very different in that environment than in an ideal environment. In an ideal environment, that where you are set up to succeed, where community is set up to succeed and be something that's not just something you're investing in temporarily, getting everything you can out of it and then leaving, then what you should do on day one is take very little action. Don't do anything in the community. Like you said at the very beginning, build internal community. That's what I would focus on. Day one would just be talking to existing employees about what they think community means at the organization, how people have experimented with community in the past, and then asking them, who else should I talk to? Who else can you introduce me to inside of the organization? And just spending a few, ideally months, while you're also doing some other things. Like this doesn't have to be your full-time job, but just spending those first few months just getting to know people inside the organization, getting to know the landscape of the organization. In addition to that, if the community does not yet exist, it would also be important to start talking to customers, or start talking to potential customers or potential users of your community. So probably doing some kind of survey and then getting initial data from that, and then using that as a screener to do member interviews. And then you're able to produce something at the end of those several months where you're saying, like, here's the data that I learned, or here's the data that we're learning from. And here are the members that I spoke to. So now I have a direction based on deep insights from this team and this organization, and deep insights from our members. So now I'm going to give us a path to follow down. So again, this is about leadership. Our job as community builders is about internal leadership as much as it is about external community building leadership. Because a lot of people can come in and just start spray and pray and just throwing stuff against the wall. It is very difficult to stand your ground and have a vision and get people bought into that vision and invest in it over many years. Yeah. So, but if you're at a company like OpenAI, just start doing stuff, okay? Just do stuff and measure it and see how it goes.
But also from my personal experience, sometimes it's really, really hard to, especially if you are a result-driven person, it's really, really hard to build a community, because like you don't have overnight success in the community, and it will take time. And as you've
Yes.
just said, it will take at least a few months to really understand what's happening within the team itself and with the customer to come up with some next steps. But how to get like first, maybe small, maybe like super small results to kind of showcase that, hey, we're on the right track. Like what are those small results?
Yeah, and you can be doing this again at the same time that you are learning and iterating. So I'll give an example of a client that we have worked with, actually, in that, she started in the organization. She was a few months in. she had the role, like 5 different jobs, actually, including community. Um, and she was like just really getting networked within the organization. But at the same time, there was an existing community and it existed on Slack. And so what she's able to do is while she's still getting networked in the organization and doing big learning and deciding, okay, we're going to have to migrate off Slack. So let's start having those conversations now. But we still have this community here. So what are some things we can do to improve it? So, spent that time figuring out, okay, let's take what's in the Slack and let's just improve it. And let's look at the metrics before and after. Let's look at engagement metrics, activity metrics, logins. And if you have access to, if it's connected through your CRM, or if you use something like, again, Common Room, then you can see in the back end, like how that's tied to pipeline, like sales pipeline. So you can actually see, okay, if we clean up this Slack community, if I reduce the number of channels on the side, and that's probably my number one recommendation from a like doing perspective, is simplify whatever you're doing, just simplify it. So if I simplify it, if I clean all this up, then I can see some quick wins, watch how that activity is changing over time, and be learning and sharing as I am going. And again, you can treat that as just data. That's just more data, so that when you finally establish a long-term vision, you can say, also, we ran these 3 tests. This was another kind of pilot project we ran that is giving us more data that's going to support our vision and our strategy.
Coming back to connecting with people within your team, like with your inner community, let's say. So how do you encourage people from other teams to work with a community team without not just adding more work on their plates?
This is a really good question and really important. And Pat Cooney is somebody who I would really recommend talking to about this in particular. I don't know if you've already talked to him for this podcast or planning to, but and I mention him because I think he does exactly this, which is that he creates the resources that those team needs and creates structure for those teams after learning what they need to get from community, whether that's, again, like pipeline or marketing leads or marketing qualified leads or whatever they decide that they need, or if it's about support and reducing support queries around specific topics. He's able to then create the resources they need and actually go in sometimes even and create content on their behalf and then share it. So just making it as easy as possible for them. So I would say the important thing is to talk to those teams, figure out what they really need, and then figure out ways that you can make it easy for them to contribute to the community. But actually getting them in the community participating, I think, is it's difficult to do, and you're not going to get everybody to do it, but it's one of the most effective ways for you to have more advocates on your side for the importance of community. Because when people really experience it, whether it's an executive who comes in and does an event in the community, or somebody from your sales or your marketing team comes in and does a small event with the community, I find that people do that and they're like, oh, I loved doing that. I want to do that more. And then they become advocates for the work that you're doing. And that's really important for you in your career.
Hopefully they become advocates. I'm like, oh my God, it was hard. Please never ask me to do this
Don't make
again.
it hard for them.
Yeah, sometimes
yeah.
And I also feel like every community builder has to goes through some kind of negotiation course or something like that, to maybe even hostage negotiation, just to know how to talk with different teams. But I think that it might be helpful, how to really help people, help me help you, because it's
yes.
Yeah, sometimes it's really, really hard. But how do you bring visibility to the overall community impact on business internally? So how do you talk about community wins within the team?
I think it's important to do it in a light. Well, again, this is all going to be dependent on your culture. Everything is with an asterisk, but in a light and frequent way. The more frequent, the better. And I was actually just at a gathering that Bill Johnston organized in San Francisco, and I'm blanking on his name right now. He used to work at Asana. It will come to me. He was talking about the importance of internal PR. That was his job. Joshua Zirkle. His job that he kind of as director of community, he said, I'm not only here to again establish this vision for all of this, but also half of my job, if not more, is just public relations internal. So for him, that meant quick, like weekly Slack updates to the team of like, here are the wins from this week. Here's what I did. Here's what I achieved this week. Making sure that you're like, if there's an all hands meeting that happens, like find a way to, I'm going to use the word weasel, like weasel your way into the agenda, like as often as you possibly can. And is that scary? Yeah, it is. It is scary to talk to an entire company and like tell them about your results. But that's the kind of scary that helps you to grow and to grow the community. And again, you're not speaking because of your ego, I hope, but you're speaking because you want the company to continue to invest in community. And therefore you need to be the spokesperson for the community. So you're really a vehicle for that. So if public speaking freaks you out, for me, it had always freaked me out until I started to think about it. It's like, I'm actually providing a service on behalf of the people that need this organization to continue to invest in this community. So you're providing a service for them, if that's helpful to anybody here. So yeah, I just think that like frequent, regular updates and then just getting as visible as you possibly can within the organization is really important.
Just reminded me that what Tim McDonald shared on the previous episode, that the best way for him was to prepare a small summary every day. So like what went like this rose by thorn way, like what was good, what was not that good, and like what was bad. And then he shared this small summary. At first he told it took him like 30 minutes up to 1 hour to prepare this, and then it came up to 10-15 minutes because he always know what to share. So it helped to really grow his community and to be in good contact with C-level. And totally happy. My God, the power of small steps everywhere, even in the community. So community is not always a bright side. There is also a dark side. So how do you talk about the challenges you face?
It's important to be diplomatic about this. You don't want to always be complaining or talking about all the things you don't have and all the opportunities you haven't been able to seize upon because you didn't have the resources. So I actually think that to talk about challenges, it's more important to talk about them not with your coworkers and your leadership on the team. Find a community, and this is why we run the CMJ community, where it is safe to talk about those challenges and people won't be judging you, or it won't potentially affect your job security. That's just the reality that we're in. Is like, if you are perceived as too negative, people won't want to work with you. So I understand that this work is very, very, very difficult and is often under-resourced. So find a group of community builders, even if it's like 5 people who you've just met over the years, who you can talk to and problem solve with, so that by the time you bring those challenges to your actual team at your company, you've thought about them and you've thought of solutions to those challenges. So when you bring the challenge to the organization, you need to have already thought about, okay, here's my plan A, B, and C for how we're going to deal with this challenge. That is hard to do in a silo and to do alone. So that's why I think it's so important to have kind of like a team of advisors who you can meet with.
Yeah, community world is amazing. I'm totally agree. And like just finding a person to talk to and just being totally honest. Yeah, no, not everyone can be that honest with you in your company, but community builders are super honest. So definitely.
Watch your back. Be careful in corporate environments. That's just the honest truth.
Yeah, Carrie, I really wish to have the sky as a limit, but time is a limit. So the final question, what is one thing to do right away for someone who struggles with identifying their community ROI?
Well, I would want to diagnose kind of what they're struggling with. And because my first inclination is to say, go talk to people within your organization. But if what you're actually struggling with is, I'm afraid to talk to people in my organization, then we need to do some confidence building and like addressing some imposter syndrome and things like that. So I just want to acknowledge that I think the answer is go talk to people, either in your organization or other people, like people that Yurii knows and other folks who have been on this podcast. Like, listen to everything you possibly can about this and just gather as much information as you can and build up your confidence and know that even if you're early in your career now, that you only learn by taking these small actions, and you only learn and build that confidence by showing up and doing the work. So it is going to be, when you feel more confident, it will be well earned after many years. So listen as much as possible to as many diverse voices as possible.
God damn it. Last but not least, name 2 people I should reach out to and talk about community ROI with.
I thought you were going to say list, but not last.
Yeah, exactly. Least but not last. Totally.
I will list. There's so many. I've already mentioned a couple who I highly recommend you talk to. Pat Cooney being one of them, who was at Pronto Forums. They changed their name. And I'm sorry, I don't know the name off the top of my head, which that's all my failing, not theirs. Pat Cooney, Bill Johnston, if you have not spoken to him before, he will blow your mind about ROI stuff. He's worked with like Dell and Autodesk and really, really large and complicated organizations to build ROI models. So he's definitely someone to speak to. Marjorie Anderson, I know you know her, has a really interesting perspective on this, given that she works with Google on like health and wellness. So health and wellness matters to Google of their employees. And so would love to know her perspective on this more. So I could just keep naming names, but I will stop there.
Got it. And what is the best way to connect with you?
Really any of the social networks except Snapchat. That's the only one I'm not on actively, at Carrie Melissa Jones.
Okay, so even Threads, yes?
Even Threads.
Okay, got it. Deal. Carrie, thank you so much for this extremely valuable conversation. I'm always super happy to talk to you, and thank you very much for sharing your great, huge experience so openly.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, see you in the community world.
See ya.
And thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about how the community can help you reach and overcome your business goals faster, let's connect on LinkedIn and talk about it. That's it. We're done. See you in the next episode.